Hey everybody, welcome to Life is Birdful. I'm Anthony, and today we're going to be talking about a little story, a little Christmas story, a little Christmas tale revolving around eggnog. Eggnog is without a doubt one of the Christmas staple drinks. It is a certified Christmas classic, despite it being awful. Luckily, you can usually make it a little bit better with a little holiday cheer, and that's usually in the form of brandy, whiskey, or rum. I actually like it pretty well with a little rum. But seriously, no amount of hard liquor could usually convince me to drink some eggnog. I find it a bit putrid. But today we are going to talk about a time where people were so hard up to be able to get a little bit of a stiff holiday drink in them that they were willing to not only drink eggnog, but actually form a mutiny against the United States military. Today we are going to talk about the West Point Military College's Eggnog Riot, also known as the Grog Mutiny. This is going to be fun. If you wanted to become a military officer of some stature, of some significance, you would usually go through West Point to be able to get that prestigious education in your background and kind of set you above your peers. However, West Point didn't always have that reputation. In fact, at one point in time, it was kind of just a place you would go to be able to get some type of posh education. That way you could go get your military job and kind of certify yourself as a member of like the upper class of society. It didn't always have the prestige about it. However, after the War of 1812, the United States realized we really actually need our military officers to be able to function and perform their military duties in a satisfactory manner. So they started reforming their premier military college, West Point, to be able to create certified, without a doubt, badass military leaders. And they started reforming West Point and making it a bit stricter, making it a bit harder. That way they could actually get out of it what they wanted out of it. We started seeing a series of reforms. We started seeing all the food that was being served at West Point. It kind of resembled military rations. Additionally, we started seeing stricter restrictions. So we saw less alcohol. In fact, no alcohol was allowed on campus, and people were cadets. They were subjected to very, very strict military life throughout their education. That way, when they graduated and took on their military roles, they would be, hardened badasses ready to take the field and lead their troops. Now, the alcohol restriction was a little bit lenient on two occasions, and that was 4th of July to celebrate America, and Christmas. That way, all the cadets could, be able to throw a little bit of a party, let loose, burn off a little steam, and just have a bit of a good time. However, there was this one point where all the cadets, they got a little too drunk, they all started dancing, and they hoisted the commandant, the leader of the school, up onto their shoulders and started parading around. So the headmaster of West Point was just so shocked at the loss of military bearing that he completely forbid the drinking of alcohol no matter what, period. If you were there at West Point, you weren't drinking. That was fact. Now, a few days before the Christmas of 1826, some of the officers in training, the cadets, which included such illustrious characters as Robert E. Lee and Jefferson Davis, they decided that they actually were going to say, screw the rules, we're going to throw a party, we're going to get drunk off our faces, and we're just going to have a good time. So they started sneaking into the food reserves, the cafeteria, and they started stealing spices and eggs and various amount of different ingredients that they would be able to use to make a big eggnog grog, which would be the centerpiece of their festival of rule breaking. On Christmas Eve of 1826, several cadets actually snuck off campus, and they went to some local nearby taverns where there had been a history of the taverns kind of being willing to exchange some of their hard liquor, their hard spirits, in exchange for military goods. So the students were going there trying to make a bit of a barter where they would be able to get their hands on the key ingredient to making an eggnog just right. some whiskey or brandy or rum. Reportedly, this tavern kind of caught on to what was happening, and they were like, okay, we'll make this deal with you. We'll give you some of our hard spirits, but we're going to jack up our prices. That way we can take you for everything you got, because we know you're your own, we're the only option you have. You're not going to be able to get your hard liquor if you don't come through us. So the cadets kind of got together. They started talking about it, and they decided, nah, that's too much. There's no way we're going to be able to trade enough goods to be able to get the amount of alcohol needed to supply our massive party. So what they ended up doing was somehow commandeering a boat of some sort. I'm assuming it was like a little dinghy or something. And they actually crossed the river to the other town on the other side of the river, where they were able to make an adequate trade, where they actually secured several gallons of whiskey. That's a lot. As they started making their way back to base, they were actually stopped by a guard who was willing to turn the other cheek in exchange for 34 cents. Doesn't seem like a whole lot, but when you adjust for inflation, it's still not really a whole lot. Regardless, the cadets, they made it back into campus, they made it into their little dormitories, and they started cooking up some eggnog. And they started mixing in their whiskey, and several other scavenging parties actually found their way back with over a gallon of some other type of hard spirit and at least 3 to 4 gallons of brandy. So all in all, we're looking at around 10 gallons of hard liquor going into this eggnog. I don't know how many eggs they were able to sneak away, but I imagine that eggnog was a bit potent. The commandants aren't stupid. You know, when you have, reports say around 70 cadets, if you have around 1/3 of your student body planning a massive party, word's probably going to get out and it's going to make it to the cadre. And the cadre, as I said, they're not stupid. So they started going through doing patrols, trying to catch people in the act. And they were going through the barracks, doing sweeps and everything. Although I have to imagine they weren't doing such a good job. They weren't paying so close attention that they didn't notice that 70 people were missing. Regardless, the one place they didn't look was the kitchen, where all these cadets were in there whipping up their festival drink. According to some sources, around midnight is when their beautiful concoction of hard liquor and eggs and sugar and spice was completed, and they started drinking. And around 2 a.m., they were apparently so drunk that they were just falling out into the hallway, singing and screaming and making a whole bunch of ruckus, which of course woke up the cadre. I hate this guy, but this scene is actually kind of funny. It almost seems like it was a scene straight out of Hollywood. Apparently, throughout the drunkenness, Jefferson Davis actually saw some of the cadre approaching the kitchen where all the noise was coming from. So he sprinted down the hallways, he burst in the doors, and he was like, guys, the cadre's coming. But they were actually just standing right behind him while he was saying it. To make matters worse, it wasn't just the normal cadre, the normal teachers and instructors in charge. It was actually the headmaster of the school, the guy who implemented such harsh restrictions and the forbiddance of alcohol. So he was probably a little bit upset. Immediately, the officers busted in the door. They started trying to reinforce military order. They actually placed Jefferson Davis into a point of arrest, and they sent him back to his room while they actually read the Riot Act, the literal Riot Act, to the rest of the drinkers. And interestingly, the Riot Act actually used to be a real ordinance, a real law, where if there was more than 12 people causing a ruckus to general social well-being, you could actually place them under arrest for inciting a riot. That's where the term Riot Act comes from. Some of the less drunken, the more in control, they were actually subdued and they were sent back to their rooms, and everything was fine for them. But the rest of the students, the ones who are way too drunk, they basically said, hey, you're reading us the Riot Act? Let's riot. Reportedly, dozens of drunken students started terrorizing the campus. They were throwing rocks, breaking out windows. They were trying to burst into cadres' rooms. And apparently, there was actually a plot, a scheme for some of the students to actually capture, subdue, and I don't even know what they would do at this point, but they were trying to basically take the headmaster as a hostage. So the cadre started going into full-on defense mode, barricading themselves up in rooms where people like beating down their doors. And apparently at one point in time, people were so close to actually get into one of the cadre's rooms that they actually fired a shot through the door at the drunken rioters, if you want to call them that. Luckily it didn't hit anybody, but I mean, shots were fired. This became serious. There were reports of students breaking into the armory, running through the halls with muskets and bayonets and the old cavalry swords. I mean, it was pure chaos. For over 4 hours, these drunken fools raised such hell that there was just no stopping them. And it literally lasted until they were either sobered up or just so drunk that they blacked out, basically putting an end to the mutiny. As I mentioned, over 1/3 of the entire student body partook in the riot. And the next morning, there was several barracks, and some of the other barracks, they woke up and they went to formation and everything, while the one barracks that threw the party, they were just in complete drunken disarray. Only a portion of them showed up to formation. The rest of them were still blacked out in hallways or under arrest, or it was a complete breakdown of military bearing within the schoolhouse. The fallout from this eggnog riot was pretty severe, but not as severe as you'd think. See, West Point was still, as I mentioned, in that point where they were trying to build up their reputation, and they were afraid that if they actually kicked out 1/3 of their entire student body, that they would be seen as an unreputable schoolhouse, as incapable of fulfilling their duties of producing qualified military leaders. So instead they started going after the ringmasters, the leaders of this whole fiasco. And at the end of the day, over 18 of the students were actually expelled from the school, and the vast majority of the rest of the 70 rioters were placed under a almost house arrest. They were basically forbidden to go anywhere, do anything. They were basically put on academic probation, and anything that they did, they were walking on thin ice. They could be booted from the school in no time. Interestingly, I found out that Robert E. Lee and Jefferson Davis both testified against the rest of their party goers. So I guess being traitorous to their own countrymen just kind of runs in their blood. Maybe it's a little bit of a habit for them. Unfortunately, both of them were granted clemency, which allowed them to go on and become the Confederate generals that they were, and actually the Confederate president. But regardless, the West Point eggnog riot, it was just such a fiasco that even though it is commonly known amongst military historians, it's a blot on their legacy. They try to cover it up. They don't really talk about it that much. In fact, my wife's dad actually graduated from West Point, and he had never heard of it until I was asking about it. Anyways, I know this isn't a beer topic. I usually talk about beer, but I just thought this was such a fascinating, interesting part of like alcohol history and drinking history. So I guess the key takeaway is if you don't take mutiny serious, you could end up in a civil war. And if you forbid the consumption of alcohol completely, young men are going to raise hell and drink alcohol regardless. So prohibition never works. I felt like I needed to try to add some type of like moral or lesson learned to the end of this story, but I don't know. Really, there isn't one. I just thought it was so interesting, and I really wanted to share it with you. So thank you very much for indulging me down this little fun alcohol drunken history rabbit hole. So like, comment, subscribe. Remember, there's a story in every carton, and that life is beautiful. Cheers, y'all, and Merry Christmas.